Excellent. So this is a session focusing on iSDAsoil, which is a soil map of Africa that we recently made available, freely available on our website, isdaafrica.com. If that's not what you were expecting, please don't go away. We would love to get your opinion on our digital maps. We're planning to break this session into 3 sections. We're going to have a demonstration of the resource, and then we have 3 or maybe 4, if we're lucky, panel members who have experience of using it over the last few weeks and months, and they're going to give us some personal opinions about that and their insights into where it might go next and what different sectors might do with that. We'll have a bit of a Q&A with each panel member as we go ahead. So from our experience, we would love you to put your questions in as soon as they come along. Yesterday we got them all at the end and it was a little bit of a gallop. So at any point, just go to your chat box and put in a question, either for panel members or technical questions for the team, and we'll try to organize them as we go along. Okay, so right at the end, we'll have a general Q&A, a little bit shorter than it was yesterday. Time's a bit short, but we would love to answer all of your questions. If we don't get to them during the session, we'll follow up with you separately. So, Matt, if you are ready, I hope you could put your video on. Matt Miller's going to give us a demonstration of the resource. Matt's been managing this project from the outset. He's our lead data scientist. And just a quick shout out to thank our technical partners, Tom Hengel and his group at Envirometrics, and their partners who have done some wonderful work to bring this dream into reality. So we're still early in the morning in England. Might take us a little while to warm up, but you're looking ready to go, Matt. So handing over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. So I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. Great. So thanks everyone for joining. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm a lead data scientist here at ISDA, and I've spent the best part of the past year and a half working on iSDAsoil. Probably sprouted a couple of grey hairs in the process, but really excited to finally get this out into the public and get it in front of the users who might want to ultimately use it. So as Jonathan mentioned, we've been working with Envirometrics, our collaborators, so we're really grateful for their input. And today I'm just going to be giving you a brief bit of background, then I'm going to jump into a demo, and then, as we said, we'll move towards feedback from the panel members. So we're calling it a farmer level digital soil map for Africa because we believe that we're finally at a resolution which is meaningful at the individual smallholders farm. So we've produced soil properties at 30-meter resolution. But how did we get there? Well, the first thing to do is bring together all the available data. So this map here gives you an idea of all of the input data for iSDAsoil. So we included in total about, well, over 100,000 training points from different sources. And we've got the main data sets that we've included listed here. So many of you might be familiar with the AFCPA 1 and 2 projects. It was a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, lasted about 10 years, aimed at improving soil information across Africa. And they sampled around 40,000 different locations. We've also included a soil profile database from ISRIC, around 13,000 locations, which was also collected part of the AFCPA project. And then also LandPKS, which is crowdsourced soil observations. And then also IFDC, various projects that they've been involved in where they collected soil data, and Africa Rice and Tamasa projects. And we've also included additional data from smaller data sets that I've not mentioned here. So this was a starting point. We have all these point observations of soil properties, but how do we get from that to a consistent map? So I'll just give you a brief technical overview of our process of how we did that. So we used a machine learning approach, and that equates to about 24 billion individual locations predicted per soil property at 30-meter resolution. So it's some really big data. The first step, as with all of these types of processes, is to gather all the available data and make sure it's clean. So anyone who's worked with data can tell you that it can be a messy affair. So the first thing we need to do is ensure that all the data standardize. So we've got different data sets collected at different times by different people using potentially different protocols. So the first thing we need to do is make sure all the data is in the same units. We also need to harmonize across different data sets. So where observations were made using different lab techniques, we need to make sure those are equivalent, and we develop some functions to do that. The next thing we need to do is remove any outliers. So these can really throw our predictions off if we don't remove any artifacts. So we have to do that, and it can be introduced by all sorts of different issues. So maybe there was some faulty lab equipment, maybe there was some human error in entering data into a spreadsheet, and a lot of this was entered by hand. So once we've cleaned up all that data, and we sometimes did this iteratively to improve the data, we loaded it into a training points database. We've then overlaid it with our covariates. So these covariates are really important because they're what we use to predict our soil properties on a consistent geospatial basis. So we have 250-meter resolution covariates, so a number of different satellite products. We've used climatic information such as average temperatures and rainfalls. We've used terrain variables, so slope angle data sets, aspects, a digital terrain model, things like that. We've also prepared 30-meter resolution satellite images coming from the Sentinel-2 and Landsat 7-8 projects. And these were really important because they're what have allowed us to go down to a finer resolution of 30 meters. So we spent some considerable time and effort preparing these additional layers, and it proved worthwhile because they offered additional predictive capacity for our soil properties at higher resolution. So once we've prepared all these predictive covariates, we overlay them with our soil training points. And then we train two models at 250-meter resolution and then an independent model at 30-meter resolution. And this, if you like, is where the magic happens. So we used machine learning, as I mentioned before, an ensemble approach, which means it uses 5 different machine learning algorithms to produce the most accurate data. So we've used a tree-based approach, including random forest. We've also used neural networks and general linear models. So once we've made our predictions, we do that at 250-meter resolution and 30-meter resolution, and then we merge the results of these. So we end up with a prediction layer, a map of predictions, but also a map of model errors and the uncertainty. Then finally, we do an expert check, which is a really important part. So us data nerds who just like training machine learning algorithms, we don't want to get carried away, so we have to put the data in front of the soil science experts who know what to expect and can help us identify any issues which can come from algorithms or can come from normally dirty data being put in. And we incorporate any feedback, and then we repeat this process. And we did it about 5 times, this whole process, each time incorporating additional feedback and potentially new data which has become available. And by the end of it, we got quite good at streamlining this process. So we're able to create new predictions relatively rapidly. And that's important for if we want to do any updates in future, which we hope to be able to do. So next, I'm just going to give you a demo of some of the functionality from ISDAsoil. You can visit the mapping interface here on our website, isdaafrica.com/ISDAsoil. So when you first join the ISDAsoil website, this is what you should find. This is a fully interactive web map, so you can you can scroll around. The first thing I want to highlight is this collapsible panel on the right here, which contains all your options. So you can get rid of it if you just want to focus on looking at the map. So we're showing organic carbon here, and we've predicted at 2 different soil depths. So we've predicted 0 to 20 centimetres and also 20 to 50 centimetre ranges. And we've done that for all soil properties where applicable. We've got this legend here, which I want to highlight, because if you hover over each different colour, it tells you the range of values which are associated with that colour. The legend, or the scale of the legend, isn't always linear, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. We've also got this opacity slider, which increases or decreases the transparency, which is useful for seeing the underlying layer. And from the underlying layers, we have a map or a satellite image, which is helpful for looking at, for example, individual fields. And as I mentioned before, we've produced a data layer, but also an uncertainty layer. And you can toggle that using this button here. So for each soil property at each depth, we've produced the data and the model uncertainty. And this is really important because you can get an idea of how sure the algorithms are of the data that's been predicted. So we'd always encourage people not just to look at the data, but also to look at the uncertainty alongside that data. So to give you a brief overview of the soil properties that we've predicted about 20 in total. We've categorized them in these following 4 categories. So we have the chemical properties, for example, organic carbon, total carbon, nitrogen, and pH, which has its own color scheme. We then got physical properties and landscape information, so your different textures, for example. And we've also mapped the USDA texture class. So this is a categorical variable, so you have to hover over the legend and it will tell you what values associated with each color. And you can also click anywhere on a map to retrieve that specific piece of soil information at the pixel that you've clicked on. And that's shown here with the lat long. Next, we've got soil nutrients, so a number of different micronutrients, but also macronutrients, which you can explore at your leisure. And finally, agronomy information. So we've included cropland maps of 2015 through to 2019. These aren't actually produced by ISDA, they were produced by the Copernicus project, but we've included them because they're open access and for consistency. Similarly, we've included land cover maps from Copernicus 2015 through to 2019. Again, this is a categorical variable. And finally, this fertility capability classification, or FCC layer. And this is a layer that we've created based upon a framework that was devised by Pedro Sanchez and co-workers. And it really aims at highlighting constraints to soil fertility at any given location. So if we look at the legend here, we can see green means there's no constraints, and then as we move through to a more red color, we have an increasing number of constraints. So if you click anywhere on the map, again, green means no constraints. Now I should just mention this doesn't mean there's no constraints to fertility within the soil. This just means within the subset of the framework that we've mapped, there are no constraints, but it doesn't mean that there are no constraints in reality. So again, no constraints is green, and then if we click somewhere else, for example, saying there's low potassium, click on a different location with 1 constraint, it's calcareous. And for example, 2 constraints here, and so on. So this is kind of a forward-looking layer. It's giving you an idea of the direction that we want to take ISDAsoil more towards decision-ready information. So maps of soil nutrients themselves are of limited value to the end users that might want to use ISDAsoil. But what we're doing here is trying to create more actionable information, which might be of use of to the farmers or the end users. And this is, so we hope to create a lot more layers like this in future. Just to also highlight that we have a search box much like Google Maps, so you can either, for example, type, no, can't spell today, still early in the morning, type in a location, or you can also enter latitude, longitude, comma separated values, and click on that location. So I'm just going to zoom in now on a specific area to highlight some additional functionality. This is actually a field that we know well. This is one of the farmers that we're working with in a pilot project in Kenya. So if I just switch back to this potassium map, the first thing that I wanted to highlight really is we keep going on about this being field level information. Why are we saying that? What does that actually mean in practice? So if I reduce the opacity to 0 here, you should hopefully be able to see that underlying satellite image, and there's some fields in this image. So for example, our farmers' fields here. You should also be able to see fields here and here. So I'll just click there. And if I just increase this opacity, you can see the size of the 30 by 30 meter pixels in relation to the underlying fields. And you can see that each square, so for example, there's a square here. Each square is at a similar geospatial resolution to the fields. So that's really why we're saying it's field level, because we're finally at a resolution which will enable us to do advisory at the field level. And just to compare this to, for example, the cropland maps. So these maps are at 100 meter resolution. So this square, for example, is 100 by 100 meters. And you can see again, that is as large as the field, if not larger. So you perhaps might not want to be making field level decisions based on this more coarse information. And if I switch back to our 30 meter resolution information, you can see the difference. So the next thing to highlight really is well, what does this mean? What can you do with it? If we compare this area to the left of the map, we can see it's kind of yellowy orange color, whereas to the south here we've got some more purple colors going on, i.e. there's lower potassium. So for example, 180 parts per million, down here it's more like 89. So what does that mean? Well, for farmers in the south here, we might recommend that they need to apply more potassium to their fields to achieve a similar yield. Now, this concept perhaps might not be groundbreaking to many of you, but the fact that we're able to do it using a cloud-based approach with these maps, rather than farmers having to pay for an expensive in-field test, we think is really valuable information. So we're reducing this uncertainty around the soil properties by providing this map. And previously, farmers who might not have been able to afford a field test don't have any additional information. So if I just go back to this location, next thing I really wanted to highlight was the uncertainty. So you might look at this image here and say, well, it's kind of generally a yellowy orangey color, i.e. there's similar levels of potassium across this image. So we would recommend that these farmers apply similar levels of potassium to their fields. However, not so fast, because if we flick over to the uncertainty, it actually paints a very different picture. So you can see our farmer's field here on the left, it's more of a blue color, i.e. there's high uncertainty. The predictions aren't so certain. If we look over on the right here, it's more yellow, so there's a lower uncertainty, so we're more sure of the soil property predictions at this location. And we've actually quantified those prediction errors. So for example, this pop-up box, you can see it's predicted a mean of 180 parts per million potassium. But if you look at this variability below that, we've actually given the error one standard deviation either side of the predicted mean. So in case of our farmer, it's varying between 120 parts per million and 270 parts per million. If we click over here, for example, the same predicted value, but the variability is less. It's varying between 160 and 200 parts per million. So again, although the predicted values are the same, because of the differences in confidence intervals, we might want to recommend that these farmers do something differently, i.e. our farmer on the left here, they're not so certain of their soil properties. We might want to suggest a more conservative intervention, a less risky intervention. And this really, we hope, addresses one of the main questions that we have around this data, which is, well, how accurate is it? Can I trust your data? And what we want to say here is, well, we can't possibly know how accurate data needs to be for your purposes, but what we can do is furnish you with the information that allows you to make the decisions by yourself. So we think this uncertainty is a very valuable piece of information, and we would always encourage people not just to look at the data, which can in some cases paint a very consistent picture, but also look at the uncertainty and take it together, because it might change what you want to do with the data. So I'll just go back to our farmers field here. The next thing to highlight, continuing on a theme of site-specific management, is again this FCC layer. So for our farmers field, fortunately for that farmer, it's showing us there's no constraints. But if we want to click over here, for example, there's a slope angle constraint. And that would make sense if I reduce the opacity. We can see there's a river running down here, so there's probably a steep-sided valley. So this, if there's a farmer's field here with a slope, although the soil properties might be the same, we might want to recommend that these farmers do something different, because they're at a higher risk of erosion or leaching. Similarly to the north here, if I click, we've got an aluminium toxicity constraint. So this is caused by low pH and low organic carbon content. So again, although the soil nutrients might be consistent, because we've got a aluminium toxicity constraint, we might want to recommend, for example, these farmers apply some lime to bring up that pH, or we could recommend that they apply some organic fertilizer rather than inorganic fertilizer to try and help boost that organic carbon content. So again, I hopefully I've demonstrated to you that the kind of information we want to make available here with ISDAsoil, that it's not just about the soil properties, but it's about the uncertainty and also the more decision-ready information. So bringing in some of the factors such as slope angle and the terrain information to inform the management. So that's it for this brief demo. I just want to highlight a couple of other things for the ISDAsoil website. So this is a web page, not just a map. So you can also scroll down, and we've created some supporting information on the ISDAsoil website, which I'll just briefly highlight. So obviously we've got background information here, but we also have a developer portal. So this developer portal is what we've used to access to allow people to access our data programmatically. So we've created an API, so that allows developers to query any location by lat long. So if you're not interested in pretty maps, you're just interested in cold hard data, this is a place for you. And we would encourage people who want to build applications on top of ISDAsoil to use this route to retrieve our data. So the first thing you need to do is sign up for an API key. It's all completely free, open access. So please sign up for a key and give us your feedback. We'd really like to hear about how you've used it and whether you've run into any issues, although we've done lots of testing, so we're pretty confident of this. So I'll just give you a brief idea of the data that you can retrieve with this. So everything that you've seen on the map is also available via the API, and you can enter your lat and long you can enter the soil property you require, in this case pH, and also the soil depth. You can hit execute, and this is just a try it out area, just to see the type of responses. You can see it's telling you this is pH. It's got a value of 5.9 at a depth of 0 to 20 centimeters. You can also change that to, for example, texture class. Hit execute, and this time it's categorical information, so it's telling you it's sandy loam at the 0 to 20 centimeters. So you can access all of our data this way, and we'd really like your feedback on how you're using our API. So please sign up using the link here. The next thing is this technical information page. So we go into more detail than I gave at the start of this presentation as to our technical process for creating the maps. So please have a read here if you're interested in our process. And then finally, an FAQ section. So before you bombard us with emails asking questions, just double check that we haven't already answered your question here. We've collated answers to about 10 to 20 different questions that we thought would commonly occur. So I'll just jump back into the presentation now. So should also mention that this data is completely open access under a CC BY 4.0 license, so you're free to do with it what you like, and we would encourage you to let us know how you're using it and also get your feedback. You can also download entire data sets via Zenodo in bulk. So each map is a GeoTIFF file. It's between 5 to 10 gigabytes in space. And we also will include all of the covariates that we used for the predictive soil mapping. And then finally, we're currently working with the team at Google Earth Engine to make all this data queryable via this interface, which will allow you to do slightly more elaborate queries. So that's not quite yet available, but if you sign up to our mailing list, we will send out an update when it is. So finally, I just wanted to mention, visit our website if you want any more information on anything that I've spoken about. You can also sign up to our mailing list for updates. And also, if you want to build something on top of ISDAsoil, then we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to hear your ideas, how you want to use it. So please just get in touch via the info@isdaafrica.com email address. So thanks to our partners, so Envirometrics, Tom Hengel, who did a lot of the machine learning, GI Lab and MultiOne, who helped with various infrastructure and satellite data pre-processing, and also Rothamsted Research and World Agroforestry Centre, who have helped with expert input to the maps. So I just wanted to finish by saying that ISDAsoil is the starting point. We've created these maps for the community. We know that we probably haven't included all of the data that's out there, so we would encourage everybody to contribute data, give us feedback on this, and then hopefully we can run updates to incorporate that feedback and include more data so that we can make progressively more accurate and more useful maps. So thanks for that. I'm going to stop sharing now and pass back to Jonathan.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. Wonderful for 6 o'clock in the morning. Wish I was that awake. I think it gives us a really nice feeling for the advance in resolution and the confidence intervals that you can get off the map. Yesterday, one of the panel members that have been using the map reported that their R-squared values to their nutrient emission trials was significantly improved at our 30-meter resolution as compared to the previous soil grids at 250 resolution. Anyway, don't believe us, go and have a play with it. So as Matt said, it's there, it's live. If you want to go and use it during the session, please, as many of you as possible, have a play with it, and maybe that will stimulate some questions. So I think the prize has already gone to Tadesi in Ethiopia for the first question. Thanks very much for that. And in fact, your question is very much the topic of our panel members. So you're spot on there. I did a presentation on Tuesday which gave some insight into the uses that we're putting iSDAsoil to on the ground. And our main purpose really for the panel is to get some experience from others in other sectors, in other geographies, what they think they could do with it, what they've had experience with it, and we're going to have a discussion around that. So, but please keep your questions flowing in the chat box. It's great to see them coming in already. So I'm going to invite Christy, if you're able to put your video on, Christy, to join us as the first panel member. Christy van Beek is the Chief Agronomist of Agrocares. Agrocares is our tech partner for our pilots in Kenya, and that's where we're doing a lot of on-farm soil testing. So we're definitely living the experience that we are projecting here. iSDAsoil is just very much a resource for the community to build tools and applications for on-farm use. It's not for direct application. So Christy's going to really reinforce that idea. I don't want to steal your storm, Christy. Thanks for getting up so early to be with us. And I think for a few minutes, you're going to give us a little bit of background on what Agrocares are doing, and then give us a few tough questions at the end if you wish. We look forward to that always. So over to you, Christy. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christy van Beek. I am Chief Agronomist at Agrocares and Director of the SoilCares Foundation. As Jonathan already mentioned, we are all about soil data and helping farmers to make informed-based decisions. At Agrocares, we developed spectroscopy devices to determine nutrient contents and organic carbon contents on the spot using near spectroscopy. This helps farmers to make decisions on the use of nutrients, and it is on the spot, so within a few minutes, farmers or their extension officer can determine the nutrient status and get a recommendation based on the available fertilizers, what fertilizers to apply to reach a certain yield, considering that soil information and considering the target yield level of the farmers. I really enjoyed the presentation. I think it's amazing what you've been able to put together. Of course, I do have a few questions. It's also what you asked me to prepare, and I would like to start with the one about interlaboratory variation. You have brought together several sources of data. At Agrocares, we are often experiencing the huge variation between different laboratories, and also when you look into the literature, the interlaboratory variation is well known. So I was wondering, how do you cope with interlaboratory variation? And do you want me to, how do you say that, have all my questions in once, or do you want them one by one?
It's so early in the morning, Christy. We'd love to go one by one. Otherwise, who knows what we'll remember. So yeah, if you can tolerate that, that would be great. Yes, well, obviously, the single largest source of data in iSDAsoil is from AFCPA. And so that was the premise of starting AFCPA 10 years ago, that there would be a central reference lab, so that we could take that error term out of that. I mean, I will pass over to Keith in a little while, because he would definitely come with a much more detailed explanation in this space. But I think that one of the things that we really want to emphasize in this is that, yes, of course, there are these error terms, and there's no getting away from it. And there are many layers of them between these sorts of resources and something that's really valuable for a smallholder. And that's not just the error terms around the soil analysis, that's around the interface with the crop and the recommendation and the response to the recommendation. And as we're putting a lot of effort into also the economic aspects of how much fertilizer you put on is only one part of the story. That helps you to get to productivity, doesn't necessarily help you get to profitability and increase in income. So one of the things that we're saying as our disclaimer around this resource entirely is that you've got to go into the field and do validation. So immediately, we are already, as you know, running nutrient emission trial experiments in Ghana. We're collaborating with others who have done that in Nigeria around maize and across Africa for rice, and really trying to get that ground truthing on the farm level. So I think that's our only real response. There's no doubt that there's those errors there. We've gone to extraordinary lengths to minimize them, but there's no way to eliminate them. But if I may, if Keith, you're able to put your video on, I'd love to throw you to the technical dimension of the broader answer. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's an important question. Yeah, I mean, there are a number of sources of variation in the data going into the map that, we're well aware of. I mean, certainly at the first level, we have variation amongst analytical methods, and we've tried to take that into account by harmonizing using data from the literature to bring them all in line to one analytical method using conversion factors. So that's at one level. The second level, which you mentioned, is variation amongst labs. There's a real trade-off here. I mean, the limitation to digital soil maps is really the number of ground sample points that you have for calibration. Of course, we'd very much like to have all the results in one lab, but that's not possible. So we still feel there's value in trying to harvest what there is out there. I'll mention in a moment, sort of ways to build forward to improve that. So it is a trade-off, but and then I think the third thing is sort of this variation over time where we're using legacy data and soil profile data have been collected maybe some time ago. So there is variation in them, but the key point at the end of the day is when you're faced with a lot of uncertainty, as we typically are with soils information on farm, narrowing that first chunk of uncertainty has the most value. And even if the measure you're using is not super accurate, it can have enormous financial value to narrow the uncertainty. And we've done tests which we show we can get with the soil map, and given the errors that we know of that it has, a maize farmer in Ghana, say, could get $50 to $100 per hectare benefit from using the soil map to improve their fertilizer recommendations, compared to, say, maybe in getting very little profit by using a blanket recommendation. So it's all about narrowing uncertainty and whether the information has value in narrowing uncertainty, and we feel that it does. But going forward, we have invested in this global soil estimation, spectral library and estimation service, where we're trying to standardize reference data to one lab, as you have done in your lab, to be able to get around this problem. So in future, once we have that going, then all future sort of field spectral measurements will be standardized to one reference laboratory, and then that data will improve in quality enormously as that goes ahead. So trade-offs all around, really, yes. But value, I think, yeah.
Great question, Christy. Short question, very long answer. The reality.
Yeah,
so
and if I may, can I respond?
Yes, please.
Because, well, Keith, thank you very much for your answer. And actually, you already addressed a second topic, which I think is very important. And that is, so you have mapped the spatial variability, but you already mentioned the temporal variability. There are, you have data from some time back and more recent data. At the same time, the objective is to use this data to help farmers make decisions to improve their soil, meaning that in time you expect soil quality to change. Now, I would like to know, and I'm not sure whether you are the person to answer or that it is Jonathan or someone else, what are the future plans with regards to regular updates of these maps, or how will you continue feeding this map with new insights of soil quality?
Yeah, well, I can start and others can chip in, but I mean, our plan is to harvest as much high quality data as we can. I mean, there's still a lot out there that people have collected which we haven't managed to harvest yet or haven't agreed to share. We hope that this map will encourage greater sharing of data for public good so that everyone can benefit. So moving forward, we really want to attract high quality and more consistent data going forward and provide updates to the map as we get significant batches of new data. And also, locally, I think people will collect more data, and we may be able to then tune the map to their localities better in the next map upgrades after they've supplied that information. Then I think beyond that, it's really building on decision-ready agronomic applications on top of the map is our next sort of really big objective. Yeah.
Can you already see some trends? Because there are quite some discussions about whether soil quality is changing in certain areas. If you look at your data, is there something you can say about temporal trends?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to pick up difference in soil properties over less than a few years anyway. So, as a first cut, we're trying to just reduce variation in what soil properties are likely to be there now to advise decision making. I mean, the topic has been raised about whether we are going to put change maps over time. Matt may want to comment on that further, but it's an incredibly demanding thing to do, because then you need an awful lot more accurate data to be able to start detecting changes over time, and that is a very strong demand, if you like. It's quite a difficult nut to crack. I mean, I think you can do that locally. If you collect good data locally, very, very high accuracy, then you can start, say a 5-year period, perhaps detecting changes using and deploy those into digital mapping. But I think beyond that, it's quite a difficult challenge. And we're really focusing on cutting away that first level of uncertainty as sort of what are the soil properties that are likely to exist now on farms that farmers are facing. Yeah. I mean, some of it you can infer from management by putting in extra information on management of what changes are likely to have occurred. But I'll finish there. Yeah.
Sorry, Keith, not meaning to cut you off, but yes, time is getting short. So we'll take one more question from you, Christy, and
okay.
so we can manage our time a little bit. We can always come back at the end. I'm sure you still have.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to say that we try to relate nutrient balances to trends in soil properties, and that was incredibly difficult. And I still think there is a lot to explore and to learn there. Then my final question, and Jonathan, I think it's the one you expect from me, is that, well, this is a great map, but you started your presentation with something mentioning about farm levels. So where is the farm, and where are the farmers, and how do you bring this information really in the hands of the farmers?
Thanks, Christy. You're doing a great job at checking off all of our top questions, definitely. So, I mean, as we've been saying along the line, this is very much a resource for the community. This is a peer-to-peer, a B2B resource. And as we are doing, we want everybody else to do something similar, and that is build partnerships with those on the ground, whether that be the national programs, whether that be NGOs, or whether that be the private sector. And really get that validation and calibration working very well, and refinement, and then build the tools with those that you already have a trusted network with. So we're very much committed to the concept that extension service and village level advisors and champion farmers are an essential intermediary in this whole process. And certainly in our strategy, we're developing tools to be in their hands and for them to interface, interpret, and work with the rest of the value chain and deliver that advisory to the farmers. So at this point, we're not trying to get or trying to promote solutions that go directly as digital products into the hands of smallholders. We're very much trying to build this community around let's share data, let's improve the accuracy and the precision, and let's aggregate as much of that calibration and validation data as possible. And one of the things that, just adding to Keith's response to the earlier question, is that this is, when we're making this shout out for data, this is not really just about, share your data in your locality and improve the prediction for your locality. What we see across ecoregions is that if we improve in one location, that's improving the predictive power in another location. So we don't need to be doing this everywhere for every crop. We can start to get economies of scale if we can really bring a community effect on this. So great talking to you, Christy, but we're going to have to move on to the next panel member. We'll come back to you towards the end. Thanks so much for those questions. I think that Meklit has joined us. If you're able to put your video on, Meklit, that would be great. Meklit's is a data scientist with IITA that we're hoping to build some collaborative projects with in various countries across Africa. Welcome, Meklit. We would love to hear a little bit about what you're doing and where you think this might go in the long term. And like Christy, if you want to throw some tough questions to us, we're always very, very happy to receive them. So I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for having me today. It's early, I guess my voice is still breaking. I'm Meklit and I work for IITA, and I'm here to present you actually a work we are doing with an Acre project. So it is a group effort I am talking about here today. The Africa Cassava Agronomy Initiative project Acre is working on an agronomy platform. We call it Akilimo. So just to give you a bit of content, therefore you will be able to follow my story. We are working on cassava crop, and it is 5 years ago the project started with in collaboration with partners, and our partners are quite diverse. They are all working on cassava value chain, but some are frontline partners working directly with the farmers, and the others are like advising farmers, and the others are providing agricultural inputs, fertilizer, herbicide, seed, and stuff like that. And the others are interested in from more credit and market area. So the first thing we did was we asked them where the demand is, what kind of support that they need, and they identified. And within that, what comes on top, 5 use cases identified are fertilizer recommendation and scheduled planting and other agronomic practices as well. So in that line, we start working to produce a digital, a paper-based, versatile kind of tools that will give advice for farmers. And so on the first instance, what we did is just to give you the big picture of the modeling framework. We use several crop models, Lintool and DSAT and Queftus. So we identify, ideally on a farm level, what we want to do is identify what is the potential yield and what is currently the farmer is getting, where is the gap, and how far the yield can be increased. But our ultimate aim is not really about yield increase. It is about what is a profitable yield increase. So farmers are going to put their money, they are going to take risk. So we would like to know, is the response, is there how much return in investment is possible? So you can imagine how many input is coming in here. The rainfall data is coming in, or soil data is coming in, and each one is coming with its own error margin. So yeah, an error propagation is there, but regardless. So at the first instance, what we did was we do have about 2,000 field trials that we conducted in Tanzania and Nigeria. We are working. So we do have ground truth data to validate, to train our models and so on. So we used the data from soil grids on 250 meter resolution. We have Chirp's data and the NASA data combined together, and we produce a recommendation on a farmer's level. And there it helped us to go from our point level observation to a farmer level, or in areas where we don't have measurements to give prediction, we use soil grids data. And that was good. But to be honest, using only the digital soil data covers a certain level, was enabling us to capture more regional level variability. On a farm level variability, the gap field was on some very crucial soil fertility indicator that we get from the user, right? So that input was very, very important for bringing our prediction capability really to an acceptable level. And using soil grids data, we get about like soil NPK, that is where we are interested in, about 0.7 R square for N, and not too far away for P. K is always quite a tricky one to reach. We were about, I guess, 0.4-ish for K. And recently, it's even last month that I get the API from ISDA, and really great efforts. Well done, job well done. I really appreciate that. So I used the data that I can get from ISDA as well, directly incorporated in the scripts that we are using. So it is now the main source of soil data that is getting into our all applications. So with that one, we managed to get, we saw a little increase, an encouraging increase in the R square for soil N and P. We are closer to now 0.7508, and even for soil K, we saw a little increase there. So that is the story of Akaya Kilimo, where we are using soil data in providing site-specific recommendations for fertilizer applications, and we are using it even for scheduled planting application in these areas. So yeah, that is my story, Jonathan. Back to you.
Excellent, thank you so much. And very glad to hear you're reinforcing the profitability for smallholders target rather than just profitability, productivity. Certainly very much our focus too. So for the audience, much better for you to hear this from people on the ground than us. You know, iSDAsoil can be used, but the reality check is very clear to us all. This is just one step. And we feel that moving from the regional level to the farm level, at least at the data precision level, is an important interface opportunity. But as Meklit has said, this is clearly just the beginning of the story. And the collection of data by the farmers, by researchers doing remission trials and so forth, is the critical piece that's really going to make the difference. And we hope that that's going to be a synergistic process, and that we can keep making this better by collecting more and more data from more and more locations. Right, okay, so thanks very much. I think you probably saved us a little time. If I will just pause for one moment. If you had any questions you wanted to throw at us, we'll be glad to give you the floor. Otherwise, we're gonna grab that time and move on. Entirely up to you.
No, it is good. You can move on, and if any question comes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Meklit. We really appreciate that. So we're going to move on to Step. Step, if you're able to swap in your video, that would be great. And just to reinforce the story, I mean, Step's working with an organization that's completely committed to a level of farm size which we're only aspiring to get to. So I think we're still a few steps away. But the 1 Acre Fund is focusing on the 1 acre farm, and that's definitely where we ultimately want to get. So Step, would love to hear from you, from your experience. I think you've had a bit of access to the data and been playing with it a little bit, and would love to hear about any of your thoughts about where we can go next with it too. So thanks very much. Over to you.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, just a little bit of background on 1 Acre Fund. Sorry, I've got a fly that's very interested in me here. So Yeah, actually, the majority of the farmers we serve are even on a smaller scale. We're called 1 acre fund, but I think our median field size that we're working with our farmers is actually more like half an acre. Yeah, we've just started trying to work with iSDAsoil. Before that, we were working with Soil Grids, and we're very excited about this development. I think to kind of run through some of the things we're using it for, we're actually working with Meklit a bit, trying to adapt some of the approaches they developed in the Acre project to maize and kind of region or field specific fertilizer recommendations for smallholder farmers, but field specific in a very broad sense of a system whereby we would gather a little bit of feedback from farmers on their current yield level or some of their field characteristics, and then recommend to them maybe one of 3 different packages that we might offer in a site. The scale at which we operate doesn't really make it possible for us to kind of go all the way down to literally field-specific recommendations. Currently, we're serving just over 1 million farmers across Eastern and Southern Africa. So we're really trying to find this balance between specificity and scalability. So fertilizer recommendations is definitely a big part of that. And as has been mentioned a couple of times already, we're definitely not just interested in yield, but also profitability. And then I'd say even beyond that, actually, we're quite focused on return on investment, being that we don't understand just whether, for example, applying zinc in your field is likely to be profitable, but whether that is a competitive investment versus applying more nitrogen, for example. So we want to look at the kind of ROI that you might from applying different nutrients at different rates. The fact that we've got confidence intervals on the data from ISDA is a huge bonus for us. That means that we can approach those analyses in a much more robust way and kind of give more consideration to what is the actual probability of farmers achieving a profitable response, rather than just looking at it in a very sort of binary way. Besides fertilizer recommendations, we're also in the early stages of trying to use the data for lime recommendations. At the moment, we do that using the SoilCares product and just kind of taking rules of thumb of pH level to determine whether or not lime recommendation is likely to be beneficial. But we would like to use the data that we now have in ISDA to kind of develop pedotransfer functions in combination with some of our existing lime response trial data to try and predict the level of yield response that you'll get with lime application in different locations and different rates of lime application, and the time period to achieving a return on investment. We're also using the data a bit for targeting some of our training interventions around erosion, or at least we're planning to do that. And I have seen actually that there is some data around erosion risk that we haven't looked at properly yet. I guess one of my questions would be what the longer term plans are around that. We've been interested for a while in kind of trying to develop a very large scale map of soil erosion risk using universal soil loss equation, that I suggest ISDA might be a better place to do that. And then I think the final bucket of things that we're using the data for currently are around trying to estimate soil moisture in real time. So in combination with satellite rainfall data, trying to predict soil moisture at a very granular scale to inform things like planting date recommendations, real-time guidance on top dress timing, and longer term trying to incorporate estimates of yield potential into those two things as well, which could also be really useful for some of our work around insurance. Yeah, I think that's probably enough of an overview of the stuff that we're working on. I don't know if you want to ask me questions or I should ask you questions. I have some. But...
We'd love to pick up on some of the things that you've been talking about. Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Deb. And I think you've put some great pointers to things that we feel very, very seriously that are, you know, fundamental around return on investment, confidence intervals, and balancing, you know, this ability to get lower cost things working out of the cloud, but wanting to get things that are very relevant to smallholders on the ground. And that's very much about where we want to take this next, you know, coming to your question on that level. And we definitely don't want to do that alone. We want to help many others do that. But just as an example, you had asked about erosion. I mean, that's not an area where we had naturally felt that we would do much work. As you know, we're trying to move into Rwanda, and that's where erosion is definitely a big issue. So we would definitely see that demand from users on the ground very seriously, and want to reach out and see if we can find you know, viable solutions in partnership. As you know, we're a mission-driven organization, but we're also, in a sense, mission to become financially sustainable. I mean, you're very much in the same area too. The idea that we've got to harness the market forces in order to get the sort of scale that you've achieved. And so we're always trying to find that balance. Where can we work with commercial aggregators or others to bring some value from the broader value chain to drive this sort of thing? So certainly we'd love to work with you on that sort of thing. I think somebody else had asked about integrating this with weather data in real time, which really links up to what you were talking about too. We haven't done it in East Africa, but we've been reaching out to you know, companies that are solely focused on weather data and trying to, that's our natural next step, I should say, for getting a fertilizer recommendation tool to work very well. After you've managed to make some progress on the soil analysis side, we obviously feel that the weather data is the next big deal. And so we're definitely wanting to work on that. I mean, as you probably found, there's lots of people who are providing high-level weather data, but that's not necessarily where we want to go. We want a hyper-local weather data, and there's a much smaller list of collaborators. But again, we would always say that we want to do this in partnership with people on the ground who already seem to have some evidence for opportunity to build a business model in that space, and then for us to layer up on that and to synergize with them. So that's a general message. So thanks very much. I mean, that's very specific to where you are leading us, but we put that shout out very generally. And of course, more broadly, where people want to do that themselves, we would definitely like to look at the options to help them do that at arm's length. So yeah, I mean, I think given time, we might actually move on step. I mean, if you have other specific questions, I can wait for one, but otherwise we'll move on.
All right, I'll limit myself to one. It's been mentioned in passing a few times, people using these data in combination with nutrient emission trial data. I'm wondering what appetite there might be kind of amongst the community we've got on the call today for sharing nutrient emission trial data and somehow making that available through the ISDA platform. Kind of to this point about, yeah, soil data gets us only so far. It's often not as straightforward as we like to imagine to convert that into a fertilizer recommendation, but having NOT data gets us a lot closer to that. We've got data we're happy to share, but would love to have access to other people's data as well. But yeah, I think that could be really helpful in helping us actually convert some of these nutrient levels into actual probabilities of yield response from fertilizer application. So interested to hear if you've got any plans around that.
Yeah, excellent. I should say to the audience, we haven't primed any of the panel members with any of those questions, but that's certainly one of our most favorite topics. And as you know, we've been running some nutrient emission trials for ourselves in northern Ghana, and we've felt ourselves how difficult that is, how time consuming that is, and how expensive that is. We did that because we wanted to have direct experience in an area where we want to be working. in order to calibrate and validate our own sort of fertilizer recommendation tool. But it's really brought home to us the value of collaborating in this space. So already we've reached out. In West Africa, we're focusing on maize. At the moment, we've reached out to IITA and CIMMYT and the Tamasa project, and they have nutrient emission trial data from northern Nigeria. So we've already moved on to that. And at the same time, we've been working with Africa Rice across Africa to do similarly. I think they have 1,000 nutrient emission trials across the region. So at the moment, we're driving this ourselves where we have specific interest, either by geography or by commodity. And really also trying to demonstrate that, and certainly we'd love to do that with you and show to the world how much synergy we can get out of these collaborations. But yes, we're very, very aware that many projects, particularly development projects and R&D projects, have collected all this data at enormous expense and time and effort from the scientists, and it's all sitting on computers. And that's really where we would love to go next, because I think we can see a lot of synergy from across ecoregions, as I was saying earlier. We don't need to be carrying out these emission trials for every crop in every country. If we're all collaborating and bring this into a central space, I think we can see some great economies of scale. So we're very, very keen to proceed on that. I might just throw this to Keith, because Keith's been driving the nutrient emission trials for us in Ghana, just to see whether he wanted to add anything further to that.
No, I mean, this is really important because, I mean, nutrient emission trials are telling us what we're really trying to estimate, which is the soil nutrient supply capacity. And of course, there's a big, the error between and the jump between the soil test values and, estimating those nutrient supply capacities. I mean, we have been making some simulations of, how much the error in that affects, our ability to provide good recommendations and translates into profit. But I mean, we'd be really interested in working with people like your network yourselves to find ways of actually reducing the costs of doing nutrient emission trials and scaling them in an effective way, because obviously there's a trade-off between rigor and cost, but definitely we're going to need a large number of emission trials to validate, continue improving calibrations of any kind of nutrient management advisory. And in some systems like rice, soil test values have been much less successful in estimating nutrient supply capacity in flooded rice. So definitely that's an area we'd love to talk more about moving forward. Yeah.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keith. I'm going to have to cut you off there, Steph. It's a fascinating discussion, and let's continue it. That's definitely the message. We've got about 15 minutes maximum for each panel member. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. And the organisers have given us a hard stop because the main plenary session is going to start. So I'm happy to pass over to Thomas, who's the Chief Data Scientist at Crop Nutrition, CNLS, to its best friends known as Crop Nuts. Thomas, thank you very much for joining us at late notice. We really, really appreciate that. We know that you've been using the data. We've been watching you download it. So we'd love to know how you feel about it, and more than anything, where you think the gaps are and where you think this type of initiative should go forward. Obviously, crop nutrition coming from a very commercial perspective on this, and as we've been saying from the outset, we really feel that that's an absolutely essential part of getting to scale with these interventions. So I'll pass over to you, Thomas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for the nice introduction. Yes, and as you said, you and Keith asked me to test the data on validation sets we have at our end. So maybe some starting information. So I'm a trained farmer and agronomist, and since more than 15 years working with spectroscopy, and then you become automatically a data scientist over time. And then 10 years ago, I made the decision to change, as you say, from science to business. So I'm bringing research to business, and that's bringing me every morning out of bed. That's very nice. And as I said, I'm head of data science team from Crop Nuts. I'm very proud to be in that position and to learn from the young and talented people which are working with proximal sensors, data science, GIS, and agronomy. And we're developing applications that have actually impact and matter for the farmers. Maybe a few words on crop nuts. It's a company founded within Kenya about 22 years ago, and it's really trying to come close to the farmer. And actually, we are aiming and having impact on the livelihoods of millions of farmers over time by improving yields and reducing farming costs. So, having looked at the iSDAsoil platform, it's a very impressive effort done. It's really, there are relatively recent data insight from few reference data sources. It's in a very impressive data flow, and I like especially the innovative way to binding in high resolution satellite data. There are expert checks included, which I think is very important. And there's very useful outputs aside the soil property values, like uncertainty, cropland cover, farming constraints. It's all very useful. And very compliment to the web interface itself. It's very intuitive, very user-friendly, and especially the API is brilliant. So you can just go there within 15 minutes. You have managed to set it up, and within an hour, you have for 1,000 GPS locations, you have the data you want. That's a very, very impressive result. Congratulations for that. And before I dive into the validation approach, I would share some thoughts, because I will start from the position of why are we doing things, what are important things, to put it into perspective. So I'm a strong believer that the weakest part actually of a system determines how accurate, how good you can be in the end. And it might be another way how to describe how Keith calls it, the value of information. So the question is, what is the value of an analysis if the sample is not representative? I mean, it was a question raised the other day as well. What does the best fertilization advice help if there are no fertilizers available carrying the most limited nutrient? I mean, those are very, very important questions which have to be dealt with as well at the beginning. Then another belief I have, and it's based on experience, that there is immense amount of soil variation at all spatial scales. And we have to bring those 2 points together to understand what actually our application means for the user, for the smallholder farmer, for example. So, and then you need to draw the right conclusions from that. One could be that if you have a soil sample, that this needs to be representative for your field, and that means it needs to come from a crop, from an area with homogeneous crop response. And then other important things, make first things first. So we have heard, and I know it's very strong simplification, but first look at pH and organic matter. If that is in order, then the nutrient use efficiency of the other nutrients can actually be high enough to have financially sound results as a farmer. Then another aspect is, if you have some soil analytical and advisory tool, whatever that might be, always judge it from the application perspective. So what are the action limits? What are the associated risks of deviations across all scales, like soil property values? And then actually, what are suitable indicators to judge the impact of your application? And as Keith mentioned as well, what do you compare against? What is your alternative? Often it's, in terms of fertilization, it's a blanket recommendation system. So all this has to be balanced and judged together. Okay, then on the validation exercise, so to start with, my personal expectation was that having a 30-meter map where you can make a field-specific advice on, that's simply not possible. So that's my starting assumption. Then what did I do? So I selected 600 point samples from topsoils out of 21 agricultural relevant counties within Kenya. So I would say it's a good representative set for Kenya conditions. Then from that set, we use 6 soil properties. where there was an intersection between what we had as webcam values and what's available at ISDA. So the pH, organic matter, exchange with potassium, magnesium, sulfur, and zinc. I focus on pH and organic matter because the results are comparable with the others, and as I said, first things first. One small comment, at least when I tried, the phosphorus data layer was not available for Kenya. I'm unsure about the reason. Then the main observation is if you look at the linear regression of predict or interpolated map values versus webcam values, then for me an important indicator is the slope of this regression. And what we have seen is that the slope is lower than 1 and relatively low. So it can range from organic matter, the slope was 0.07, and for pH 0.27. So what does it mean from the application perspective? So the pH, the reference values were between 3.1 and 8.8, while the mapped interpolated values range from 5 to 7.6. So the very low values were strongly overpredicted, and the high values were strongly underpredicted. And from a fertilization perspective, that's quite critical, because if you have a very low pH value, then you need to know that you can take accordingly actions. So that was, I think, a shortcoming of, at least on the data set tested. And on organic matter, it's a similar, so the slope is very flat, and so very low values are overpredicted and high values are underpredicted. So on the data set tested so for Kenyan conditions, so I would say at first place it's better than I expected, honestly. But in addition, I would say at the same time, as it is now, it's not yet ready for fertilization advice on farm level in Kenya. Irrespective of that, I think there are quite some promising and interesting prospects to use it on a bit coarser level, like a village level. So to get insight into attainable yields and distributions of it, land suitability, where to do to what, or to use the information to plan where do I want to make actually omission trials, or to show things, to understand things. And yeah, as well, the land use is quite helpful. How intensive is the use there to make decisions where to plan actions. And there are actually some questions I have to ISDA. And one would be, as we are, as a business, are very much interested in to tailor-made or to develop applications which are tailor-made. And the uncertainty to price relation of an application is quite important. It's quite obvious that the cheaper some service is, the higher the chances that it's more uncertain result. But once you know the uncertainties, then you know, okay, how do I have to position, or I can position a certain service. So we would be more interested in understand the value of information concept, really see in detail how it functions to make better decisions on business models. Then another one that's especially difficult for me as a researcher, how to communicate uncertainty and complicated things easily to clients. I mean, over time, it's really like, I don't like AskQuery as a measure because it doesn't tell much. I would even say AskQuery sucks, so for the term. But we need to find better ways. And then there was another question on, I mean, it's very good to improve this data resource, and it's it was an open invitation to exchange data to add. From a commercial perspective, for example, the data we are gathering, they belong to a business, and there is some value as well what we invested into it. So it's not all funded, of course. So I'm wondering what ways of data exchange could be there, of mutual benefit, how to make that really attractive. I don't have an answer yet. It's an open question to discuss as well. Could be interesting for the broader audience, and as well as already brought in the area of omission trials. Okay, how to share them. I think that was in a nutshell what I wanted to say, and I'm happy for critical questions and waiting for the discussions.
Excellent stuff, Thomas. Thank you very much indeed. I'm really glad that you were our last panelist, because we've had lots of positives about this, but the take-home message that you've given us and the whole audience is so important, and it's so important to our message in general. So thanks very much for going through the data to get some real data-based opinion on that. And as we've been saying from the beginning, we really see this as the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. We do not want to encourage anybody to think that this is a solution that the farmer can tap into this and decide what to do. You've asked lots of questions, and I'm not quite sure where to start. And you've pushed lots of buttons, which I'm sure Keith is very eager to respond to. But before I pass over to him, actually, right at the beginning, you were talking about the importance of fertilizer availability. And I think we would add to that, not just the availability, but also the affordability and the quality related to that. And one of the things that is a principle for everything that we do is to work at the whole value chain level, is not to try to jump in and have an intervention that looks very nice and it might be able to demonstrate at a certain level, but something which is integrated with the full value chain, the commercial aggregators, the off-takers and everything, to make sure that all of these pieces actually come together. We know very well that many of the value chains are quite fragmented or very fragile. If you don't have these integrated solutions, it might work for a little while, but not for very long. So I'm really pleased that you brought that one up. We can come back into that in more detail, but I'd love to get Keith into the discussion. You put the primer around value of information analysis. He's been tirelessly working on that recently, and we've got some very interesting components around that. You're also talking about the correlation between certain different elements that are predicted in ISDAsoil versus wet chemistry or some analysis on the ground. And I think one of the things we start to see, and Keith will talk about this in more detail, is we need to get to a more nuanced level where we're saying, well, look, this resource is quite good in this space, but these outliers, no, it's really bad for that. So be very careful in your advisory system there. And generally our solution is to say, there is no silver bullet to any of this. We need blended solutions, and we swap in and out these different technology options where they work very well, as you say, where that is a price point which is appropriate to the customer or the user. And there's no quick fix to this. We need to bring all of this together. But much better that Keith talks about this, because he has oodles of evidence to base his opinion on. So I'll pass over to you, Keith.
Yeah, what great questions. I could spend the rest of the day answering them, but I'll try to be very brief and just say sort of three things, basically, hopefully briefly. Yeah, with any kind of digital soil mapping, we see this tendency of what I'd sort of regression towards the mean. So what we see with the soil map errors is we're very good at estimating the mean values. So we're getting very little bias at the mean values, but we're getting more, underestimation at the top end, overestimation at underestimation in the bottom end, overestimation at the top end. So I think the map will work best when you have sort of a constraint which is common in an area, and then you're getting pretty good estimates of the average situation, over the area. And say the 10% of farms where you've got more extreme values, you're going to not do quite as well. And this is which brings in a very important concept that I think is what I call blended diagnostics. What we're trying to do is to say, well, what makes most sense in terms of diagnostics when? How far can you go with the soil map alone? When would a soil spectral, field spectral test have value? When would a lab spectral test have value? When would a full wet chem analysis have value? When would a mission trial have values, or on how to combine those together judiciously? And I think that's the key way forward. In terms of value of information, that's a big topic, but it's a fundamental principle to the way we work. And there was a paper presented earlier in the conference about soil testing being a pipe dream. This is misleading, because they're claiming that because of the variation in amongst laboratories, the variation in the recommendation you can get is so large that it's not useful. Well, that's not true, because value information, what counts is how much uncertainty reduction are you able to achieve through a test, a diagnostic test, and what does that translate to in terms of increased profit? And that's the only valid test really of the usefulness of that information. And we have, the value information analysis comes from decision analysis, and we can quantify the value of any sort of diagnostic in terms of the extra information provided, and or how much is it worth spending to get it, and that's what we've been investing in. The last one on communicating risk, I think a couple of ones we found quite appealing is simply what is the chance of loss. That's a very powerful way to communicate risk in a simple way. And the other one is 1 out of 10 times, what's the lowest profit you're likely to make with this intervention? So I think those 2 ways that we're using to communicate risk. And what we've seen in the analysis we've done is that the soil map, in certain conditions is not only able to increase profit, but significantly reduce risk as well, the profit risk as well. Yeah, I'll stop there. Yeah, thank you. Great questions.
Thomas, I don't know if you wanted to come back on any of those. You're welcome to if you can. We've literally got 3 or 4 minutes, so you'd have to be quite quick.
Thanks, Jonathan and Keith, for the good answers. I think that especially on how to communicate performance to a client, that is quite helpful. On the judgment, it's still, I mean, you mentioned that 10% might be more difficult of samples because of this linear regression, so predicting towards the mean. But in practice, it means that at very low pH values, taking that example, you overestimate. And in the example, and especially there lays a lot of risk. So wrong classification or wrong advice at this level, the more wrong it is, the bigger the negative impact is. On the high end, that's less relevant, at least for most other soil properties, for sure in the smaller farming context. Yeah, so I think it's as well important to look more into detail to understand, okay, where are the challenges and what do they really mean? Yeah, that's my main concern on that.
Yeah, I think we've been looking at a couple of things. I mean, one way is to how we can improve the errors in terms of these extreme values and whether we can do some bias correction on that. I mean, that's something we're looking into. But the other one is, if you're providing advisory at an aggregator level, there may be mechanisms by which you can compensate for area, if you got it wrong, and for example, on a small percentage of farmers, whether you can actually compensate that, but it still generate an overall benefit for a population of farmers is another way of that. So I think we're very much aware of that and looking at ways to sort of try to address those limitations. Yeah, thanks.
These are really critical issues, and thanks so much for bringing them up, Thomas. We could definitely have a whole webinar on these topics, and I think we should in the new year. We're going to have to close you off there, so thank you very much for joining us and for doing all the prior work to base your opinions on. We very much appreciate that. I will just as we wrap up, pick up on your last point around commercial data, and that's just a general comment. Yes, we have created an open resource here, but we're aware, obviously, that there's an equal amount of data in the commercial sector as there is in the public sector. And we as a social enterprise really feel that we're in a great position to build partnership agreements as well as commercial contractual agreements in order to build these more than the sum of the parts across sectors. So we're very much open to you, Thomas, to Cropnuts, and to everybody else that in commercial sector in Africa who's been collecting data to find a solution which protects your proprietary data, but at the same time brings a win-win solution both for you but also the community to bring this data together. I think we probably are on borrowed time, but we think that we might have another 5 minutes. Lewis may tell us that we don't, but we're going to try to use it. And then what I'm going to do just on that proprietary data versus open data, I'm just going to pass to Jamie, who's joined us recently as CTO from the commercial sector, and I think has a few opinions on that. Jamie.
Yeah, I was really glad that Thomas brought it up, that the issue of commercial data. And I think it's not only the commercial world, I think it's also, there is lots of public sector data, as Keith mentioned, which researchers have, and for political reasons and just for uncertainty on licensing, this ends up locked up. And I think we all see there is an opportunity to build something bigger if we can figure out how to share. And there are real analogs with the open source world. I'm from the commercial software world, and a huge proportion of that runs on open source software. Big companies collaborate on this kind of thing all the time because they do recognize that something bigger can be built, even if they're giving away individual pieces of work. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and I really believe there are ways we can deal with this, particularly just going back to Matt's presentation. The way something like iSDAsoil is built is taking the raw data and putting that into a synthesized whole. There's no way back from that process. So there are ways we could protect the data. So Thomas, we'd love to talk to you about, you know, it would be possible technically to integrate CNLS's data, improve the map for Kenya and other places, but without giving away your commercial secrets. So we would, and that goes for anybody who's thinking about this. So we would love to talk about this. Get in touch. I see the timer is ticking, Jonathan. I think we should probably wrap up.
Absolutely. I think we're coming to a natural end. So thanks very much for that, Jamie. And very much our thinking that as a social enterprise, as a mission-driven organization that has evolved out of a development project, these commercial models built around open core initiatives are a very interesting model for us. So as we've been saying, we really want to build iSDAsoil out as a community, but we want that community to be both public and private sector that are building resources, products, services, and not-for-profit solutions as well, of course, around that. So I think we're probably going to wrap up there. It's been a real joy having you all with us today. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much for the organizers for keeping us on track and keeping all the technology working very nicely. As we say, it's all there at our ISDAafrica.com website, iSDAsoil. Please go and play with it, give us feedback, and obviously the last shout, as always, if you have data, agronomic or soil, please get in touch. Let's work together and make this a resource for the community. So thank you very much indeed, and we wish you a good conference for the rest of the day.